My husband spent 30 years quietly saving money for a grandchild he would never live to meet. Before he died, he asked me one thing, just one. And on the day I finally tried to honor it, my daughter-in-law smiled into a camera, said, "We only use designer things here," and dropped his entire life's work into a trash can. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything for my son, for my daughter-in-law, and for a little boy who doesn't know yet that his grandfather loved him before he even had a name. My name is Darlene. I'm 68 years old, and I have spent my whole life in a small Midwestern town, the kind of place where people still wave from their porches and everybody knows your car. For 40 years, I ran a tailoring shop on Bell Street where I hemmed wedding dresses the morning of the ceremony, pressed funeral suits at dawn for men who hadn't worn them since their own weddings, and taught half the women in this town to trust their own hands with a needle. I know what a garment is worth, and I do not mean the price. My hands are not what they were. The arthritis came for them 5 years ago, slow at first, then all at once. There are mornings my fingers will not close around a needle until I have soaked them in hot water and talked them into it the way you talk a frightened child through something hard. I'm not telling you that because I want your sympathy. I am telling you that so you understand exactly what 4 months of knitting cost me, and why I did it anyway, and why what happened to that blanket cracked something open in this family that had needed cracking for a very long time. People look at a woman like me and they see someone sweet, harmless, easy to overlook. My daughter-in-law saw exactly that, and I let her, because I learned a long time ago that being underestimated is its own kind of quiet power. The quiet power I am talking about had a name. His name was Frank. Frank drove the same truck for 19 years and wore the same brown coat every winter until the elbows gave out, and I finally retired it for him. He was the kind of man who would slip a folded bill under his coffee cup on his way out the door for the cashier, who had been on her feet since dawn without a word to anyone. He thought in decades. While other men in this town were buying boats and watching them rust in the driveway, Frank was buying small quiet things and letting the years do the work. Time is the only thing that pays interest on patience, he used to say. He wanted to be a grandfather more than he had ever wanted anything, but Kyle married late. The baby took even longer to come, and Frank's heart gave out before that grandchild ever arrived. What I did not know until the week before he died was that Frank had not just been dreaming about that grandchild. He had been preparing for one. He asked me to bring down the old cigar box from the top of his closet, the one I had seen sitting there for 30 years. And never once opened. Inside were stacks of United States savings bonds bundled by year, going all the way back to when Kyle was still a boy. $50 here, $100 there, birthday money, quiet bonuses, good months patiently set aside over nearly 3 decades. On the envelope in his broad pencil handwriting it read, "For our first grandbaby." I started the year Kyle turned 10. His voice was thin when he said it, but his eyes were completely clear. $47,000. 30 years of patience, sitting in a cigar box on a closet shelf. Then he told me what mattered more than the number. Do not hand them an envelope, Dar. Money in an envelope gets spent and forgotten. Sew it into something. Make her open the blanket. Make them find it. Make it last. It was nearly the last clear instruction my husband ever gave me, and I intended to honor it perfectly. So I knitted a blanket. I started the month after the funeral, cream-colored wool with a border of tiny blue sailboats, because Frank had loved the water, because he had promised the baby fishing trips he never got to take. And in one corner, small enough that you would have to search to find it, I stitched his initials, FM, so a piece of him would be in the room for every nap, every fever, every bad dream the child would ever have. There were nights I cried over those rows, not from the pain in my hands, but from missing him with a weight I had no words for. When it was done, I sewed a flat inner pocket into the lining, the kind I used to build into traveling coats, and the shop tucked Frank's bonds and his sealed letter inside, and stitched it shut neat and invisible. I wrapped the blanket in plain cream paper, tied it with a blue ribbon the color of the sailboats, and drove to the baby shower with the box on the passenger seat where Frank used to sit. I talked to him a little on the way I still do. "Big day, Frank," I said. I had no idea I was about to watch a stranger drop him into a trash can. The party was exactly what I expected. Designer gifts, cameras up, every brand name announced for the room like a boarding call. I sat near the edge with my plain wrapped box holding my secret, and I was not worried at all. Every time a guest glanced at my package with that small particular smile of polite pity, I just thought about the pocket sewn into the lining and smiled right back to myself. Then Madison's mother read my gift tag aloud in the gentle tone you reserve for a child's finger painting. Madison took the blanket and held it up by two corners the way you hold something to check it for stains. I watched her register that it was handmade. I watched her decide what that meant to her. She turned toward her friend Brooke, who had been filming all afternoon, and she said it clearly for the camera for the room. "We only use designer things here." And she let go. The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My son Kyle stood against the wall and his mouth opened, and then it closed. He said nothing. "I need you to understand something. The worst moment of that entire day was not the blanket dropping into the trash. It was my son's mouth closing." I stood up quietly, walked to the trash can, and lifted the blanket out. I brushed off a few scraps of wrapping paper and folded it the way 40 years behind a counter teaches your hands to fold without even thinking, and I tucked it into my bag. I looked at Madison and said in the steadiest voice I have ever used for anything, "It is not really your kind of thing. I will keep it." I said a quiet goodbye to the room and walked out with my back straight. I did not cry until I reached the car, and if you have ever had something you made with love dismissed because it did not come with the right label, you already know the silence that follows. The silence of deciding very quietly and very clearly exactly how much of yourself you are willing to defend. In that silence in my car with Frank's blanket held against my chest, I cried until there was nothing left to cry. The blanket still smelled faintly of the trash, and that smell more than anything else that had happened in that room was what finally broke me open. Not the laughter, not Madison's performance. The smell, the fact that 30 years of Frank's quiet love had spent 2 minutes in a garbage can. But before I even reached home, something very still had settled in underneath all of it. Calm, certain, already beginning to work. I'd barely walked in the front door when Caroline called, shaken and apologetic. She had spoken to Kyle after I left the party. She had said his father's name and $50,000 in the same sentence, and watched the color go out of my son's face. 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. It was Kyle, and his voice was already breaking before he said a single word. "Mom," he said, "please tell me you took the blanket home." "I have it, sweetheart," I told him. "It is right here." He exhaled like a man surfacing from very deep water. Then I told him everything slowly, the bonds, all 30 years of them, $47,000, and the letter Frank had dictated from a hospital bed sealed for Hudson to open at 18 so a boy who would never meet his grandfather could sit down someday and hear from him anyway. The line went very quiet, and when Kyle finally spoke, he sounded like the boy he'd been before he learned to keep the peace. "I kept telling myself it was just a blanket," he said. "Don't make a scene." And it was Mom. It was Dad. I let him cry. Sometimes that is the entire job of being a mother. What came next to me was not anger. Anger is loud and burns itself out too fast. What came instead was the quiet deliberateness of 40 years behind the counter with a needle in my hand. I went to see a woman named Patricia, who handles these things, and together we set up a locked education trust for Hudson, $47,000 in the child's name alone, not Madison's, not Kyle's, not mine. The cleanest way to honor a wish is to make it impossible to bend. Then I called Kyle and told him what I needed. One dinner, everyone at my house. They came on a Sunday evening into a kitchen that smelled like pot roast because some things are quiet weapons. Madison's eyes went straight to the blanket the moment she walked in, folded at the center of the table. Her face did something complicated. Good, I thought. We ate first because you do not do the hard thing on an empty stomach, and I wanted everyone settled and human before what came next. It was almost pleasant. Then I cleared the plate, sat back down, and placed my hand flat on the blanket. "I would like to give Hudson his grandfather's gift now," I said, properly, the way Frank asked me to before he died. The table went still. I brought out the small seam ripper I had been carrying in my cardigan pocket all evening, and I opened the inner pocket right in front of all of them, stitch by stitch, slowly and deliberately, because some things need to be witnessed before they can be believed. I laid the contents out one piece at a time, the way a banker counts out a fortune, because that is exactly what I was doing. "These," I said, setting down the rubber-banded stack, "are United States savings bonds. Your father bought them, Kyle, a few at a time, every birthday and bonus for almost 30 years starting the year you turn 10. They are worth $47,000. The number moved around the table like a cold draft. And this I said, placing the sealed envelope down as gently as you set down something sleeping as the last letter her husband ever wrote. For Hudson to open at 18 so a boy who will never meet his grandfather can sit down someday and hear from him anyway. I looked directly at Madison and kept my voice warm and steady. This is what you held at that shower, I said. This is what you called homemade. This is what you dropped in the trash on camera because it did not match your aesthetic. She reached for her defense immediately. How was I supposed to know, she said. That is basically a trap. I waited a moment. Then I said very quietly, the throwing was entirely yours. I brought out the second envelope, then the one Frank had asked me to read aloud when the family was finally all together in the same room. My hands shook as I opened it. And not from the arthritis. I read my husband's words to his family in my kitchen with his grandson sleeping in his son's arms. Spend the money on something that lasts, he had written. And whatever you do, be the kind of family that knows the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. Your grandmother does. Learn it from her. All my love, Frank. The room went quiet. Carol Ann was weeping openly. Kyle had his face pressed to the top of his son's sleeping head, his shoulders shaking. And Madison was looking at the blanket on the table, the tiny blue sailboats, the small initials stitched into the corner. And for the first time, I truly believed she was actually seeing it. It was too late to change what had happened. But a woman who looks at something for the first time really looks as not the same woman she was the moment before. That is not nothing. What followed in the months after came slowly the way the best things do. The trust is locked and growing, sitting quietly in Hudson's name, doing the same patient work Frank used to do. Brooke's video had already been posted as a sweet moment before anyone knew what was inside that blanket. Madison took it down the day she learned the truth, but the internet keeps what it is given, and enough people in her own circle had already seen it. She filmed it herself. She posted it herself. I did not have to do a thing. A few weeks later, Madison asked me to teach her to knit. I said yes. Her first hat for Hudson was lopsided and uneven and entirely her own, and she kept it. She did not throw it away. That is a beginning. Kyle has changed the most. He and Madison are in counseling now, and he keeps Frank's old fishing hat on the hook by the front door. And he has promised Hudson they will go fishing together someday, just the two of them, the way Grandpa always planned. The blanket lives on Hudson's crib now. I brought it over when I was certain the house I was going into had learned at least a little what it was holding. It has been almost a year since that baby shower, and I am still turning it over in my mind. The world will tell you louder every year that worth is something you read off a label, that the expensive gift is the real one, and the handmade one is sweet but lesser. I want to push back on that kindly and firmly because I have spent 68 years learning the opposite. The most precious things in any room are almost always the quiet ones made by hand, given without a logo, easy to overlook. If you have never been taught how to look, I am knitting Hudson a sweater now, a few rows on the mornings when my hands agree to cooperate. His grandfather's initials are hidden in the cuff, small enough that the boy will have to search for them someday. And when he finds them, Frank will be right there, still showing up, still patient, still thinking in decades. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Is there something handmade in your life right now? Quilts in a closet, a letter in a drawer, a recipe written in someone's handwriting that maybe you have not looked at closely enough. Look closer. The most precious things do not announce themselves. They wait to be found, just the way Frank's sailboats waited in a pocket sewn shut with care. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. It means more than you know. If this story moved you, please hit that like button because it helps more people find it who might need to hear it. And if you are new here, subscribe and ring the bell. I share stories like this every single week. Drop a comment and tell me what is the most meaningful handmade gift you have ever received. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of each other. And never ever let anyone tell you the homemade one belongs in the trash.